Hey guys, JC Dean here. Today I want to talk to you about training properly for fat loss. Now there are many different ways to train for fat loss. As the old saying goes, there are 100 different ways to skin a cat. I don't want to go into every single method. I just want to talk about how I typically do it for myself and what I've written about on my site and what I've been doing the last couple years, particularly with my clients. But before I tell you my preferred method of fat loss, let's just talk about one form of exercise that a lot of people turn to when it's time to lose fat. And I get this all the time in my emails. People send me an email saying, hey, I'm going on a diet, so I've upped my cardio a lot. Now, cardio has its place, and cardio is a great way to exercise and to create some extra caloric burn and to burn some body fat. But the problem is that you only have so much time to recover. So if you've put a priority on strength training in your program and you're training 3 to 4 times per week and you're running on top of that, so let's say 2 to 5 times a week, even up to 7 days a week I've seen in some people's programs, it's not going to allow you enough time to recover. So instead of using endurance cardio as a way to burn more fat, what I like to focus on is training in a way that's really intense, usually what people call metabolic training. Some people might even call it bodybuilding training, depending on who you talk to, who you listen to, and how you classify that type of training. But essentially, I like to lean on training in itself alone. Weight training is what I mean by that, not necessarily cardio. I like to lean on that for 3 to 5 days per week. And if, in the case, you need some extra cardio just for peace of mind, or you need a little bit extra calorie burn, then I'm really partial to just walking, taking a 30 to 60 minute walk. Every day is fine if you can afford to do that, especially if the weather's nice and you can get out in the sun. I know myself personally, right now it's getting really warm. I try to spend at least 30 minutes outside every day, preferably when the sun is highest in the sky. It's really warm. I'll tend to take my shirt off and just walk around my neighborhood for 30 to 45 minutes and just really try to soak up the sun. What this does is it creates a little bit extra calorie burn for me, but it also has the benefits of just being outside, being in the sun, getting some fresh air, creating that vitamin D that's really good for health in general. But it doesn't cut into my recovery when it comes to my training sessions. And this is where a lot of people mess up. If you're doing a lot of hard cardio, meaning you're running 3 to 5 miles a day, or you're on the bike for a long time, that is cutting into your recovery from your training sessions. And if you're training really hard, especially using metabolic training with the weights, you're basically not going to be able to recover, period. So I like to place a priority on strength training and metabolic training over making someone run 3 to 5 times per week. So let's talk a little bit about the training methodology. Now, in the past, I've used pure strength training as a means of maintaining muscle on a fat loss diet. Nowadays, within the last year or so, I'm more focused on combining some strength work along with some metabolic work. So what I mean by that is I'm not a huge fan of just doing really low volume programs with the main focus on strength retention. And the reason for that is because I find that even from a psychological standpoint, when somebody is training really hard, very infrequently, every time they go into the gym for that session, let's say you're doing squats once a week, and you go into the gym on Monday and you do 300 pounds for 3 sets of 5 when you start your workout. Now, you go through the whole week, it's Monday again, and it's time to get back under the bar. Well, you're already in this mind frame of okay, so I did 300 pounds last week. I'm going to try to do 305 pounds this week. Now, in general, that's not a horrible approach, but what I've found is that a lot of times when people focus purely on strength, it can zap them psychologically. So in this case, let's say they go in, they put 5 pounds on from their previous week's best, and they get under the bar and it's really heavy, way heavier than they expected. Let's say on the first set they can only get 3 reps. And now they're forced to think about, well, do I decrease the weight and try to make the reps, or do I keep this weight on and struggle and maybe even injure myself in the process? So if they pull a little bit of weight off, maybe 10, 15 pounds off the bar, and they get 5 or 6 reps on the next set, they're already setting themselves up psychologically to view the progress as a failure, because at this point they've already regressed, right? They had it in their head that they could go ahead and add some weight, but the weight was a lot heavier than they expected, and now their subsequent sets are going to be less in terms of the weight lifted than it was just a week ago. Now, while a strength loss doesn't necessarily mean that you're losing muscle, it's still really hard on the psyche when you expect something and you're kind of riding on these strength gains as being your holy grail in terms of making progress. So I used to prescribe that a long time ago. That's not my preferred method these days, just simply because I've come to understand that strength loss doesn't mean muscle loss, and especially on a fat loss diet, something's got to give. You're not always going to be your strongest, especially if you've got quite a bit of fat to lose and it's going to take you a period of time. Those strength levels are going to plateau eventually, especially in a caloric deficit. Now, there are a lot of people that make this work. They prescribe regular strength training focused programs for their fat loss clients, and it works incredibly well. And I've done it in the past, and it's worked well. But now I really try to focus on a little bit of strength work, but mostly metabolic work. And what do I mean when I say metabolic work? I mean two things. One is incorporating supersets and trisets and even giant sets into the overall training program, usually on an everyday basis for their program. So if they train 4 days per week, pretty much every day they're going to have some type of superset or giant set within their programming. And what I like about this is that it keeps many things in check. So the first thing is I want you training really intensely. I want to make sure that you are pushing yourself really hard, but I also want to make sure that you are extra careful. So if I give you a superset or a triset, you're not going to be able to go as heavy as you normally would if you were just doing the set by itself, doing the movement by itself, and resting for long periods of time in between each set. So if you're used to resting for 2 minutes in between your squats, but now I've got you on a superset of squats and hip thrusts and push-ups, and you only get 30 seconds rest in between each of those sets, you're not going to go as hard and as heavy when it comes to the actual weight on the bar. You're going to lower the weight and you're going to really push for the intensity through the accumulative fatigue that you build as you're doing the triset. Now, some people are going to say, look, that's not that much weight on the bar. This is not going to be the best for muscle retention, but I beg to differ in the sense that you are creating a crazy amount of intensity by shortening the rest periods and upping the amount of work that you're doing in the period of time. And it's worked incredibly well for myself. It's worked incredibly well for my clients. And I notice that people tend to not get as stale as quickly as they might when fourth week rolls around and they can't make any more strength gains because they've just completely zapped themselves by being too aggressive when trying to add weight to the bar, or just getting burnt out from always being under a heavy load. I've also found that using supersets within the programming is a lot better for keeping them fresh over a long period. So in the case that they may stall a little bit on adding weight to the triset or the superset, I can suggest another movement for one of the movements in the triset or the superset, or what I can do is just change it all together and give them a few different movements to try, and that will tend to keep things fresh. So here's how I typically build a program that is purely focused on fat loss. So we'll just take one training session. This is how I typically will do it. What I'll do is I'll start with a strength-focused movement. And when I say that, I mean a big movement like a compound, such as some type of deadlift, some type of row, or a chin-up, or some type of press, a squat, that type of thing. And what I tend to do is focus on somewhere between 5 to 10 reps. I want the first few sets to be heavy and to be intense, but at the same time I want them to keep in mind their limits. So I tend to tell a lot of people when they're doing these movements to stay 1 to 2 reps shy of failure. And the reason for that is to make sure that they progress over the long term, because I like to measure progress on the first few movements of the training session. And then so over time I can see, okay, this person's recovering well, they're doing well, they're not stalling out. And if they do stall out, then I have to make a change based on that. So what I like to do is set up the first 3 to 4 sets to be a pure strength movement, however you want to define that, but mostly a big compound exercise. And then after that, I tend to have a focus on body parts that we're paying attention to that day. So if it is a chest and shoulder dominant workout, we're going to start with a heavy press, maybe with dumbbells, maybe with barbell, maybe an incline press, and then everything after that is going to be supersets and trisets based on movements for the main muscle group that we're focusing on. So the next set after that will be a superset, and it might be something like Arnold presses supersetted with lateral raises. And then we'll do 3 to 4 sets of that superset. And then we'll go to another superset where we might have explosive push-ups alternated with cable rows. Now, you're probably asking, why do you have a cable row since that works your back with chest dominant movement? The main reason for that is just to have some variety and also to balance out the pushing and pulling muscles just a little bit. In the next session, when we do a back focus workout, I'll have a few chest and shoulder movements in there just to keep a balance, but it'll primarily be focused on the back and the rear delts for that particular training session. That's how I like to set it up. It's typically a couple heavy sets of a strength movement to measure progress over time, and then I tend to do multiple sets of trisets and supersets, and sometimes even like a giant set for a circuit towards the end. Another way that I like to go about this, depending on how I set up the initial part of the session, 1 to 2 times a week what I'll do is I'll give the client a specific conditioning circuit to do at the very end of the training session. So if your training session in itself lasts about 40 to 45 minutes, what I'll do is I'll give you a timed conditioning session with anywhere from a 3 to 5 movement circuit, and you'll set the timer for 8 to 10 minutes, and you'll try to get as many repetitions of that circuit done within that time period. So maybe you have 4 movements and I want you doing 10 reps for each movement, and I want you just to go all the way through them without rest. And once you get to the last movement, you can rest for 30 to 45 seconds, and then it's time to start again. So in the meantime, you got your stopwatch going, and you're trying to get as many of these circuits done in the time frame. Now, I don't really tend to have a certain number of times that you need to get through it. I just want you to push yourself. Now, if it becomes incredibly easy, obviously I have to make a change. And whenever I set up somebody's training program for fat loss, it's primarily to get the most intensity out of the time that you're working. I don't have a main goal of trying to help you add 50 pounds to your squat or 50 pounds to your bench. Now, it's happened in the past, and I'm not saying it's impossible, but for most people, those are not the best goals, because if you get wrapped up in that goal of trying to add 50 pounds over 20 weeks, if you fall short of that, you might start to get frustrated and fail to give the intensity necessary to create the effect that we want. So again, the way I set it up is heavy compound movement at first, followed by some supersets and trisets, and then on the occasion, 2 to 3 times a week, I will put a conditioning circuit at the end of their session to make sure that they finish off with a high intensity and get the most bang for their buck for that session. Now, I actually have a couple conditioning workouts that I want to give you, and these are things that I've used for myself. I've also given them to training groups that I've done online. I've given them to individual clients. So if you want to get access to those, there's a link below in the description. You can click on there. There will be instructions to check out those workouts. There'll be 2 videos with different circuits that I use as finishers for the conditioning aspect of their fat loss workout. Alright, thank you so much for watching. Again, my name is JC Dean. I will see you next time.